Today's guest was a contestant on ABC's The Bachelor. She's one of those rare contestants who basically beat the game. The Bachelor pretty much fell in love with her, but she didn't care. She quit the show with 3 episodes left to go back home and continue living her life. Now she's pursuing her PhD in clinical psychology at Duke, and she hosts her own podcast, A Little Help for Our Friends. But when she was 18 years old, Jacqueline Trumbull showed up in Slovakia alone as a slightly pretentious and more than slightly sheltered American girl seeking to find herself. She didn't. But she did find a creepy janitor, a supportive host family, and a few life lessons that kind of put me in my place a little bit. Enjoy. This is Baggage Claim, travel stories no one tells. I'm Will Conway. If you're enjoying Baggage Claim, subscribe, mash the button, hit the bell, do the thing. This and every other interview comes with bonus questions. More fun conversation that's not in today's episode. Text MEMBER to 332-877-9540 or go to heybagageclaim.com/support. Let's get to it. Long before The Bachelor and Duke and your podcast, you were an 18-year-old American girl and you just showed up alone in Slovakia. Before we even get to why, paint the picture of who Jacqueline Trumbull was. 18 years old, first day in Slovakia. Who's that girl?
I think I was someone who wanted to be interesting, and Slovakia was sort of my ticket into the land of interesting.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family that was fairly dramatic. Like, my mom's a psychiatrist, and she would throw like French Revolution parties where everyone had to show up having written their own obituary with ribbons on their necks if they had been beheaded and that kind of thing. And I had 3 older siblings, and I, was hearing all the stories of them traveling to Paris on men's dime or, traveling illegally from Costa Rica to Cuba when they were 16, all these sorts of stories. But thus far, my life had been fairly sheltered. Like, I literally had a white picket fence. I was very virginal and kind of goody-goody. And I was like waiting, I think, for this big blossoming moment where I would have something to tell people forevermore, which was I lived in Slovakia. And 10 years later, here we are talking about it. So I guess I wasn't totally off base. But I don't know. I was like I knew I was going to be a philosophy major. So I was into that kind of thinking. And yeah, I was like a good kid I was desperate for adventure.
You grew up in West Virginia, which, for those listening before we hopped on, you said Slovakia was basically the West Virginia of Europe.
Yeah.
Why Slovakia?
Well, that was my problem. I didn't want to go to Slovakia. I wanted to go to France or Italy or Switzerland. Basically, I signed up for this Rotary exchange. It's very sort of big name in the exchange program world. And they said, rank 10 countries and you'll get one of your top 3. And I got my 7th choice. And they even psyched me out. First, they said I was going to Czech Republic. And I'd had a history with the Czech Republic because my dad's an economist who studies transitional countries or economies and used to take us to Prague. And I loved Prague. So I was like, okay. And then they started talking to me about Slovakia. It's like, what are you talking about? I'm going to the Czech Republic. They're like, oh, no, sorry. So we switched you. So that was kind of the backdrop, was me showing up fairly disgruntled in this country and being like, what the fuck? How did I find myself leaving West Virginia to then come to the West Virginia of Europe when I was supposed to be jetting off onto like my new cosmopolitan life?
Yeah, but I don't know, maybe at some point in my life, the more obscure it was, the cooler it became.
Yeah.
I don't quite know when that happened, but the idea of Slovakia sounds awesome to me because of how obscure and random it is.
I developed that as well, but I had not at that point.
Got it. So you're still in like, let's watch sunsets on the top of the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, the one defense I'll make is that the thing I'm still to this day a little bit disappointed about is that I did not get to learn a language that was particularly useful. And so my Slovak has significantly atrophied since that year because I don't have any place to use it. And so part of it was just like, I was expecting to not only be the girl who lived in another country for a year, but to be bilingual, be able to hit on men in French or whatever, or show off my sophistication. And that's harder in Slovak. But yeah, I came to that conclusion as well later in life, and I've stuck to it. And so, I mean, now I'm quite glad it was Slovakia, and it does have a better ring to it. If I was looking for interesting, it's a lot more interesting to have lived in Slovakia for a year than France.
Okay, so you show up first day,
Yeah.
craving adventure, but not quite this adventure. You drop your bags on the bed, you sit down.
Uh-huh.
Now you're just an 18-year-old girl in Slovakia.
Yeah.
What?
My welcome was quite lovely. They took me so I lived with 3 host families over the period of a year. So they all knew each other because they were in the same Rotary Club. And so one of them had a little cottage in a village nearby. And they took me there and they got me wined up. They had these like beautiful like sausages and cheeses and grapes and wine. And we were in this gorgeous little garden. And then we, I went on a walk with my host sister, and we were sort of talking about the cute boys that were there. And so there was like the light of potential in my eyes, and then I was also struggling because not only was I in Slovakia, but I was in this very small town. And I'm like, I want freedom. I want city. I want to like meet cool people. And I was stuck in this small town, in this small country where I didn't speak the language. And like they wouldn't, and like the program there was also really restrictive. So my brother was getting married that year and they wouldn't let me go. So I was just really angry when I showed up. But like I liked my host families, and I think I'd come to terms with it, and I was excited in my own way for Slovakia. And it was really lovely at that time of year. So it was a mixed bag, but I quickly I wouldn't say that any part of the year I was like ecstatic, or I never even really got comfortable. It's just now when I return, I'm like, this is the most beautiful country in the world, and this is my home.
Yeah. I've had this experience traveling from time to time, which is that, okay, so I quit my job. I was engaged to be married, left my relationship, got on an airplane to Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a point where I was just kind of skidding, not in a good headspace. I'd been in this career for 10 years and I thought I loved and felt like it was collapsing, this relationship, similar position, right?
Yeah.
I got in this headspace, it was essentially just get yourself on the airplane.
Yeah.
Get yourself on the airplane, sort yourself out, you're fine.
Uh-huh.
I'd traveled enough to know that there's this sort of, all roads lead to this same sort of headspace, this growth mindset, this curiosity, this development of compassion for other people, which you and I have talked before this conversation. I've heard you allude to that. It doesn't sound like it came from this trip though.
Yeah.
Which was a long one.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have a mixed response to that. I remember you contacted me before your trip to South America, and you were speaking in that kind of language, that kind of like, I'm going to go travel and find myself language. And I remember at the time being like, okay, like, good luck. I mean, I'm all for you traveling, but this, it felt like the same kind of intuition I'd had before Slovakia. And before, I went to Poland a year later for a few months, and in Scotland a year after that for a few months. So I kept going with this kind of feeling. And I even remember I like fiction writing, and I have this character named Casper. I have these 2 characters, Casper and Sophie, and they're both just different sides of me, but they're both these idealizers. And Casper in particular is always chasing this feeling around the next bend, that next adventure. That's where I'm going to find myself. And when I find myself, I'm going to be that guy, like wearing loafers and writing poetry in a cafe with a glass of wine. And I'm going to love that guy, like I'm going to love him. Everyone else is going to love that guy too. And that's what, that's like what I wanted to find in Slovakia. And I was kind of embracing the idea that like, yeah, maybe, obscure is just as good, whatever. There's castles here, there's cafes here, I can write poetry here, but I wasn't writing any damn poetry or fiction writing, It's like, why, like, where am I, like which corner am I around? I can be like, oh, there I am. And I think that was just an unrealistic expectation. I also think that it did change me a lot. It was just something I didn't notice until after the fact. So when I came back, I think I had a kind of confidence that I didn't necessarily have before. I felt a bit more grown up, but I've never gone on a trip and come back and been like, yeah, I know who I am now. That would have been awesome, but
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think anybody knows who they are ever.
yeah,
I don't think there's a platonic ideal form of
yeah,
who you are. I think it's just always in flux. And there's beauty in that, right?
I agree with that. Yeah.
But it means construction tape is around the entire project all the time. Hey everybody, Will Conway here. Time to sell you lots and lots of stuff that I don't believe in. Nah, just kidding. If you want to keep Baggage Claim ad-free, and you want bonus content from this and every other interview of Baggage Claim, for instance, Jackie and I have a 15-minute off-the-cuff conversation about psychedelics. I know, kind of unbelievable given how goody two-shoes she seems so far, but you'd be surprised. Anyway, if you want access to that kind of stuff, text MEMBER to 332-877-9540 if you're in the US and Canada. If not, heybagageclaim.com/support. Thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the show. So you get to Slovakia.
Yeah.
You're in a bad mental headspace. Was there a moment for you when you started to feel, I just have to lean into this, I have to figure this out?
Yeah. So this is actually this is one of the sort of vignettes I was thinking of telling. So when I was there for a few weeks before I started school, and my first family were the host father, Yuso, was a veterinarian, and his wife is essentially his assistant. And he was also a hunter, and their boys were hunters too. And so they took me out hunting. Not exact. I just remember kind of like being in these beautiful, like rolling golden hills where there's steeples. It's like, wow, this is so beautiful. Like I'm seeing it. And then they came back and they started gutting this deer or this wild boar, I think. And they like fed the entrails to the cats that were like living in their barn, which I thought was awesome. So I'm like taking photos, like putting it on Facebook. I'm like, look at this like awesome rustic experience. And they were very embarrassed. And they asked me to take the photos down. And I could not understand that. I was like, why don't you think this is cool or whatever? But that idea, that embarrassment kind of clicked in later, because once I started school, I had to go to the veterinarian office, and I'd have to hang out at the vet office before they could drive me home. And I remember one day I'm like on the computer, and this is exchange students in Slovakia, because I remember they said this about all the other ones. We spend way too much time on our computers because we're like lonely, we can't talk to anybody, and so we're just typing away at our American friends. So I'm chatting with my friend, and he's like asking me how Slovakia is. I'm being kind of a brat because I already like want to leave and go to Australia or something. Like, this place sucks. And I look behind me, and my host dad is jerking off a dog, like a boxer dog. Yeah. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, oh my God, like my host dad is jerking off a dog in the background. Like, what the fuck is this? Like Slovak porn or something? Like being a total piece of shit. As it turns out, and I essentially knew this, like that is how you collect a sperm sample from a dog. It's not that he was doing anything, primitive or wrong or anything like that. But I was just like being a snob and being shitty about it, instead of being like, oh my God, I've never seen somebody like collect a sperm sample from a boxer before. And then I like went and sat in the other room, and he must have read through my messages somehow. And he didn't really speak much English, so I don't know what he comprehended, but I remember him coming into the room and like speaking to me in this mix of Slovak and English that I could kind of understand, but he was basically trying to explain to me, he's like, no porn, it's not porn, like no porn. It's, dog want baby, owner wants dog and baby. So, he's like making the hand gesture and everything. And I'm like, God, I'm that like American brat who came into your country and like first tried to fetishize your perfectly normal like hunting lodge, and now is like doing the exact same thing you were probably afraid of, which is, like making you feel like there's something primitive or wrong with what you're doing, and like not having the basic human decency to just be like, oh, this is how a normal veterinary practice works. It's like not something about Slovakia, but I had made it into that. So I remember after that being like, I need to stop being a piece of shit. Like the way I made him feel, like I felt terrible for that. And so I do remember that being a bit of a lean in moment. There was another moment where, I told you they wouldn't let me go to my brother's wedding. And that was the program. It was Rotary, not my host parents. And I remember another kind of broken conversation where they were, because I didn't speak Slovak yet, this was in the beginning, where they were trying to explain to me, like, maybe we could, the issue was I would be able to go to my brother's wedding if my host family went with me. But if I went alone, they were afraid I wouldn't come back or I wouldn't readjust when I came back. And so they were basically trying to explain that they'd be willing to go to America with me and go to my brother's wedding. And like the expense of that, I just couldn't believe it.
Insane.
Yeah.
Right.
And I wasn't quite sure what they were saying because I couldn't, it was one of those things where the offer was so big, but it wasn't being said explicitly. And that I couldn't make the assumption. I couldn't be like, you want to go to the wedding? Like, is that what you're saying? Because then I would be like,
right,
that's too big for me to even assume.
Right.
But looking back on that, because I remember he said it explicitly like months later, I was like, wow, that is incredible generosity. Like I can't. So like if they're willing to make that effort for me, then I need to make that effort for them.
These collection of experiences where you, I think, realized maybe to a degree you were kind of getting in your own way a little bit.
Yeah.
How early in the trip are we?
Probably month 1 or 2.
So that's really positive, right? Is that obviously it's not positive that you were a brat, but so okay, you start to have this realization and you sense this generosity from these people. Did you sense your behavior change in that moment?
I can't necessarily remember because part of this is me rewriting it a little bit in history, but I do remember being very embarrassed and feeling very bad and being like, I probably need an attitude adjustment, all right, like can't let that happen again. I think that there were little moments. I mean, I loved being out in nature, but there was a pervasive loneliness the entire time that kept me from being like, I feel totally enmeshed in this experience. I feel, and it hurt because a lot of other exchange students were so happy and they felt great, but I was so in my head about not being good enough at Slovak. And people there are very brutally honest, so like I gained some weight, which is very common when you go on exchange because the diet shifts so dramatically. And like everyone pointed it out. They're like, you've gained weight. You look fat.
Brutal.
Like my host brother at one point literally pulled me aside to tell me I gained weight. I'm like, I know. Thank you. I eat meat and potatoes every day.
Man, talk about the psychological training you need to go on The Bachelor right there set up for you in Slovakia.
Yeah.
Yep. In hindsight, how'd that experience maybe change your behavior going forward?
I think I realized I needed to have a higher level of respect for the place and like a deeper appreciation of their generosity. I mean, what was really sad about that year is that they had these perceptions of Americans. It was kind of a mixed perception because the last 2 girls who had come before me were from like very poor rural areas of America. And they, I think, made a surprising impression on Slovaks. One of them at least was very well liked, but they had this mixed impression of Americans as like fancy with newfangled technology. I mean, I remember I brought a Kindle and they were like, oh my God, the Kindle.
Sure.
They always apologized to me for things like, oh, like our soccer fields aren't even. Like, sorry, we don't have very good soccer fields. I'm like, I don't care. I don't play soccer, like, or, they would like apologize for things being, I guess, dingy. Like if they perceived it to be that way or whatever, that's really quite sad because the country is incredibly beautiful. And the only thing that isn't beautiful is the Soviet influence. And they shouldn't be apologizing for that.
Right.
Russia should be. So I remember noticing that at the time, like, why do they keep apologizing? That's so sad that they keep apologizing. On the other hand, they thought that Americans were all really stupid and fat. There was that kind of, I forget kind of how I was originally trying to answer your question, but I guess maybe in hindsight, the way I'm rewriting it is I realized it's actually kind of a big deal to bring in like a fancy American to a country that they don't necessarily feel completely confident in, at least when matched up with America. And that's something I really needed to like respect and appreciate, is that it's hard, and they knew that Slovakia wasn't my first choice. And they would keep asking me, like, why are you here? Like, why the hell would you choose Slovakia? um, and that's not, I don't like looking back and thinking that they thought that I was disappointed in their country or that I should have been disappointed in their country, because it's an absolutely stunning place, and the people are phenomenally, warm and generous. I hope that what that changed in me was to realize, like, I need to stop just allying with like my American side and start really investing in this, and not make them feel bad about themselves and not fetishize them either, but just like have a more appreciative stance.
I get a sense that you matured quite quickly. You sort of came out of the high school mentality, maybe of using judgment as a crutch to patch over a difficult experience.
Yeah, I hope that's what I did. That's how I've rewritten it, to patch over my own shame at being judgmental.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to do something weird for me. You ready?
Okay.
All right, close your eyes. Okay. One deep breath. Put yourself back in that year. I want you to think of the person who reminds you of that trip. Who is that person and why?
My host father.
Yeah.
That person. I had never had, so, okay, I don't want to say anything negative about my father because I have a great relationship with my father. It's totally fine. But my dad is not the most he's not the most fathery person. Like, he's like a guy who, he's always there when you need him, and he's very practical, but in a certain way. I mean, he never had any protective instincts. We never spent like too much quality time. It was more like my dad and my mom. And so it was really unusual to have a host father that was like the closest person in my life for that whole year. And he was this man who, he was like kind of this jolly, sweet guy who, he just had this like this crinkle eye, laugh, smile. I don't remember why they would take me on all these trips, like to other parts of Slovakia. And I mean, I think in large part it was to show off the country, but it was also just what they did. Rožňava was a small town, and so we'd have to go to like larger cities. And I just couldn't believe his patience with teaching me Slovak. I mean, I remember fairly early on going on a 3-hour drive and just speaking the whole time, which, I mean, must have been exhausting for him, because it's exhausting talking to anybody who can't speak your language very well for 3 hours. But I remember it being quite nice. I remember learning the words for government and vote, I think, at the time. So we must have been talking about politics, which it makes it extra like surprising.
Right.
But yeah, he was just kind of like, he always lightened the mood. He was kind of mischievous. And I don't think I've ever had like a father-daughter relationship that felt like, I'm kind of emotionally congested myself. And so now if that relationship ever kind of arose, I'd be like, I don't know, that kind of makes me uncomfortable. But he just like made me really comfortable. And, besides jerking off dogs, he showed me, C-sections. Like, I got to watch like a C-section on a French bulldog and a Chihuahua. And I remember like in the Roma village, but they called them gypsies. So I'll just say gypsies because that's what they called them. In the gypsy village, there was like a call, like, because he was the veterinarian, that their sheep was giving birth but was having trouble. And so I just remember like he threw me in the car and we sped over there, and the sheep was already dead. So he like slashed open the stomach and pulled out the lamb. The lamb was dead. I just remember him being like devastated by this. It's just like, oh, like, but I don't know. There was just like this deep care in him, and this generosity, but also this lightheartedness. I just thought he was the best person in the world.
Yeah, I sense a serious sentimentality for him from you.
Yeah.
Is he somebody you still keep in touch with?
Yeah, I returned 2 years ago.
So you really were entirely alone.
Mm-hmm.
you developed sort of a level of, or felt that you came back with a level of confidence. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, one of the things was that it was the first time hanging out with people much older than me. And that was
Mm.
another kind of unique part of this year was that I had already finished high school in the States, and I mean, I was already accepted at UVA, so I knew where I was going next. But I had to go to high school again. And I wasn't even in the highest grade of high school. They put me in essentially junior year. So I spent the first half of the day with people who were 16 years old. And that was fine. Like I made some friendships there, but
Mm.
they weren't my closest friendships. And then I was very good friends with the two English teachers there. You know, one of them was more, I remember thinking of her as Miss Honey from Matilda. Like she had honey colored hair and she was really pretty and she would like lend me books. I remember she lent me Anna Karenina, and I would just go over to her house and have this like family, like nice family kind of like she'd serve me cake, whatever. The other one was, I think they were both like 30 years old, but she was going through, I think she was going through a bit of an identity crisis where she'd like had a kid, but she was missing her youth. And she basically, we would like go out drinking together a lot. And there was a secret, I don't know how to say, it was like a secret passage under the school where the janitor had his like offices. So he had this whole lair in the basement of the school that connected to the gym. And so the second English teacher, Zuzka, would take me. She'd be like, you want to go drink in the school today? I'm like, okay. So I would go to this basement lair where there'd be like the science teacher, the gym teacher, the janitor, who was a little bit creepy because he'd film everything and like wouldn't really talk at all. So he'd just be there filming everybody in his office.
That's more than a little creepy.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's got some like 8 out of 10 creep vibes for me.
Yeah, that was pretty creepy. But so it was kind of like I didn't really understand the relationship. Like he let them use his office, his lair, and then in exchange, everybody was like on tape all the time. So we were just drinking. So I'd go to school, you know, and they'd be my teachers. And then at night, I have one memory of the science teacher was under one arm and the gym teacher was under another. And we were all singing Country Roads, like very loudly. And the janitor was filming us. So there's a tape of, you know, somewhere in the basement of this school, like drunkenly singing Country Roads with these teachers. And then, you know, they'd go play badminton drunkenly. And, you know, so it was this hilarious experience. And then I made the mistake of telling my classmates, and I think she's been taking some hell for that ever since. But yeah. So she matured quickly because I saw her like 10 years. I saw her 2 years ago and she like doesn't drink anymore. And she's very, you know, but yeah, so I hung out with, and then I also had my weekend friends who are more college age, like up to 25. And so, and like before I left for Slovakia, I was really afraid of like navigating even my hometown. Like I have a really bad sense of direction, but like using public transportation was really freaky for me and just all these fears. And suddenly I'm like taking trains from one side of the country to the other. I'm hanging out with the people of all these different age range. I have to put up with people every day telling me like, I don't understand you. Can you say that again? What are you talking about? What are you talking? You're fat, you know, like, so I had to deal with like a lot of loneliness and a lot of feelings of inadequacy, because I really, you know, with English speaking people, I could be myself, but when you're speaking in another language you don't know fluently, your personality gets so diluted because you can't use humor the same way. Like I love using language to express myself, and I just didn't have that ability really. So just things like that, you know, made me a bit more hardy, I suppose. And when I came back, you know, I went to college. I was a year older than everybody. I had this experience, and yeah, I was a lot more confident, and I didn't take as much shit. And because I'd kind of been the white picket fence girl that people could, I was very make funnable. Like people would make fun of me a lot, and that stopped after Slovakia.
Just in terms of how you presented outwardly, it sounds like it changed. Do you think you set yourself on a different mental course, a different internal life?
I must have. I gotta give thought to what that was really like. I think I started edging myself way older. I started hanging out with much older people. I started dating much older people.
Mm.
I remember something happened. This wasn't about Slovak people though. This was about the other exchange students. At some point, they played a huge trick on me that felt really shitty. And I remember saying like, I can't, I can't be this person anymore. And I think one of the reasons they almost did it was to punish me. I had dated one of them briefly and then kind of lost interest. And then he fell for another girl. And I don't know. I guess I thought I could still have him. I thought I was prettier than her or whatever. And so I just sort of didn't accept it and like was hitting on him a lot. And so I think they played this trick on me in a way to knock me down a bit. They told me that he had gotten her pregnant, and I spent a week basically talking to him about like how that doesn't mean that he has to throw away the rest of his life and they don't have to get married and like all this naive shit being 18-year-old. I mean, those things are still true to an extent, but there's also, I'm a big advocate of taking responsibility if you do get a girl pregnant. So, I don't think I had quite that attitude at the time. But I just remember like being like really serious about this and thinking my friend was going through crisis and I could help him and I have all these conversations. And then I just found out that everyone was just like letting me believe this and like plotting behind my back. Yeah. And finally they took me aside and they're like, he took me aside. He's like, look, she's not actually pregnant. That was all a joke. And I was just like, why am I the kind of person you would do that to? And I think in some ways that's the right question because they're not bad people.
I'm actually personally very impressed by that, especially from an 18, 19-year-old, right? Because when you travel, one of the more interesting components of it is that you show up in an entirely different place with people who don't give a fuck about you. They don't know who you are. They don't care who you were. They don't care what your relationship is with your mother or who that person is you dated that one time. They care who you're going to be today, and they care who you're going to be in every day going forward. Mm-hmm. There's the capacity for reinvention, but you recognizing old patterns showing up in new situations was a more you-centric situation than it had to do with, oh, these people are just jackasses.
Yeah.
To me, feels like an internalization of a lesson that can often take a lot longer than 18 years to develop.
Yeah, and maybe that's actually kind of the moral of the story too, is that I had expected self-discovery to be easier or automatic or something, like just by going to another country, I would be a different person. But the only thing that going to another country really does is just open you up to new experiences and perspectives. And those will either land or they don't, or they're the right perspectives or they're not the right perspective. I mean, they might be really interesting and generative, but they might not be what you need in that moment. And it turns out like one of the things I needed in that moment was to have my ass handed to me in this way that had been cropping up throughout my life, and to finally be like, whoa, this cannot fly anymore.
I had a very similar moment early in my time in Colombia, which was, I suppose I just thought going to Colombia would make me more interesting. I am a person who once spent time in Colombia, was in and of itself enough to make me cool.
Exactly.
And that's so not true, because there are tiers. You sense this very quickly. There are people who are on the road to, well, it's Colombia, so there's a lot of people on the road to party. You get a lot of folks in Medellin who like saw Narcos, right?
Yeah.
And just do the like narco tourism, Pablo Escobar's the man, kind of like terrible, this sort of psychology. And then the further away you get from cities, you tend to find, first of all, the more interesting people, the better stories, the people who had that weird thing happen to them one time, and you just end up in these cool 6, 8, 10-hour conversations with somebody you'll never see again. It's beautiful. Yeah. I love those moments. But then also, it was early. I remember I was in Santa Marta, Colombia, sitting on the patio at a hostel after having just taken a bus from Cartagena, which is where my trip started. I was about 10 days into the trip at this point. And I had spent the first 2 or 3 days just trying to find my footing. And then a few days after that, developing friendships and kind of like sinking into the world. And then a couple days after that, telling myself I still needed more of that time, but sort of deep down knowing that that was just a justification for to party for a couple more days.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to Santa Marta, and there was this Dutch guy telling a story about how he had rented mopeds and driven them across the entire country. And he had this big gash on his leg. And the punchline of this entire story is that there were mudslides and there was rain and there were trucks driving all over the place and all these crazy things, cliffs, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But he got through all that stuff just fine. He parked the moped and the whole thing crashed down on his foot. And I remember laughing and then thinking, like, I kind of want a gash on my leg. Like, I want to get into that headspace, that part of, because if I just quit my job, left my relationship to go party in Cartagena, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
So that does feel like feels like almost a universal rite of passage in travel is where I'm going with this, is this idea that the country is going to be what the country is going to be. The place is what the place is. It doesn't care that you're there. Nobody cares that you're there. And it's on you to sort of find, to create the adventure for yourself. Hey there, Will Conway again here. Hey, that story I just told about the guy with the moped and my feelings about it, that story exists as a fully immersive bonus episode of Baggage Claim. Another thing about the membership, it costs whatever it's worth to you. $100 a month, $1 a month, it's completely up to you. If you're interested, text MEMBER to 332-877-9540 if you're in the US or Canada. Otherwise, heybagageclaim.com/support. That link is in the description below. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the show.
I'm sitting here like trying to figure out what the other lesson is of travel. I think one thing is that as a woman traveling, I think it's a different experience because I will never, I don't think, feel safe. Yeah. So I always kind of wanted this ability to just be like, the world's my oyster. I'm going to run out of my house and I'm going to go find an adventure. I'm going to see where the road takes me. But instead I have to have this unbelievable amount of caution and make sure I've got another person with me at all times. And so there's going to be some women listening who are thinking, like, no, you don't, woman up. Like it's like I've traveled through Africa, but I guess it's harder to find that level of comfort. Yeah. And that's not, that's okay. I guess like sometimes I think it's okay to just go to a place and party as long as you're honest with yourself that that's what you did. Right. When I went to Bali, we spent some time with locals, but like some of that time was sort of stilted. We really didn't share a language in common. There was so much of a cultural divide that I couldn't get there. Like I couldn't get to a fulfilling experience. And that's not to say that it couldn't be done. I just didn't get there. And what I remember that trip for is like meeting expats and having this 2 week sped up relationship where I met this guy, moved into his place, went on vacation with him, cheated on him with his best friend, and then got together while doing ecstasy on a beach all in a 2 week period. Like that was an adventure in and of itself. As long as I'm honest about that. And I'm not like, I went to Indonesia and now I know the culture, like I'm so sophisticated.
Right.
But I do agree that there's so much value in pushing and just saying yes. And it drives me crazy to see anybody in a Starbucks in a foreign country.
I have eaten Kentucky Fried Chicken 3 times in my entire life. I'm not really a fan. It's fine. I don't know. For some reason, I just hadn't had food that felt like home in months. 80% of all the Kentucky Fried Chicken food that I've eaten was in Cusco, Peru, in this bucket the size of me, basically. It's enormous. And it's, sometimes you need that sense of familiarity.
I agree. So, I actually had the same thought about McDonald's when I was in Slovakia. But there is a difference between you're there for months and you're like, I need this taste. I remember actually being in England. I was there for about a month with my friend who's in a custody battle there, and it's very complicated. And we got off the train. We had been in like London for the day or something. We got off the train and we got in a cab. We're like, can you take us to McDonald's? And I just loved the image of being a fucking American with my American accent, just getting off the train and immediately hitting McDonald's, like asking the cab to take us there. Like, I'm disgusting. So, of course that happens, but my bigger pet peeve, I guess, than that is those restaurants that are aimed at tourists and they're more expensive and worse than like an authentic restaurant. So that's another thing. But yeah, I don't know. I just think sometimes you need different things from travel. And a lot of the times people like go and they're desperate for this authentic experience and they don't know how to find it. And then they leave
Mm.
disappointed because they didn't find it. Or they like had some conversations with locals and they're like, wow, I had a conversation with a local. I'm like, that doesn't amount to anything, you know? But I think there's a lot of pressure to be like, yeah, I'm a world traveler. I'm cosmopolitan. I went to these places. And then I don't know. I don't know what the lesson is. Go in and be honest about what you experienced, or go in and be honest about what you need to experience. Or is it just like relax a little and just have a good time?
I think there can be and should be space for all those different types of travel. You know, I've been to Rio
Mm-hmm.
theoretically. I've been in the city of Rio for 2 weeks, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't been to Christ the Redeemer, let alone anything interesting. And do I regret that? A little bit, but I met the girl who I
Yeah,
hope to spend forever
yeah,
with there. I definitely felt that was, you know, was what you needed
mm-hmm.
in that moment, and that can be productive. And also there doesn't need to
Yeah,
be pressure on it, right? There doesn't need to be, this is what I have to get out of this experience for it necessarily to be a success. You can go in saying, this particular trip, I would like to be oriented more in this way.
mm-hmm.
And that can be 10 days on a beach
Mm-hmm.
without question. And that can also be, I'm really looking to explore and understand this place and just get increasingly isolated and just out there and off the beaten path. And that's wonderful too, you know.
I think that there's part of me that's at very good at finding adventure and appreciating adventure, because I think there's part of me that's always trying to build like a resume. I don't know if you've ever read of Human Bondage, but it's basically, you know, this guy who's living in 1900s Paris in the Belle Epoque, whatever. And he goes from being, you know, like a British boy, I think an orphan or something, and then he's impoverished in Paris and falling in with prostitutes and philosophers and artists, and he becomes an artist, and then, you know, he becomes this wealthy doctor and all that, and at the end he's offered by his physician mentor to go to like New Guinea or something to practice like exotic medicine, but he's just met this girl, and he has this realization that he's been treating his life as a tapestry, and that his inclination has been that the more embroidered and intricate the tapestry, the better. So the more adventures, the more high intensity moments, the better. But that you can choose a simpler tapestry that's just as beautiful. And I feel like I've been so attached to the intricate tapestry that it's been difficult for me to even accept the beautiful simplicity, which actually has a lot more fulfillment and depth and vulnerability in it. But there's something in me that's really uncomfortable with like emotional connection or vulnerability or something. And I wonder if that hits me with travel too, and maybe why I didn't have as lovely as an experience as other people is because I actually found it very difficult to connect. Some of the time I felt kind of withheld.
I've been trying to piece together a sort of quasi definition of travel,
Mm-hmm.
and it ties in quite well with what you said. So I'm going to read this to you. I want you to sit with it and kind of give me your gut reaction to it. This, by the way, is something I've said but don't know if I fully believe yet. So that's I do that a lot. It's just like
Yeah.
throw an idea out and let's see what it does. All right. The word travel is really just shorthand for creating a huge experiential knowledge gap in your life and then trying to fill it. What you're just communicating to me was essentially this idea of this desire to chase every experience that life has,
Mm-hmm.
while simultaneously desiring to sort of like leave some things undiscovered for yourself.
It hit me as correct, but and it could be taken multiple ways, I think. But
Mm.
so you said travel is a way of creating an experiential gap and then trying to fill it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I mean, there's a sense in which like the more you travel, the more you see what's left to travel. You know, you go to one. I think at first it's like, oh, I'll go to France, and then I'll have been to France, and then you realize like, wait a minute, I went to France and had some glasses of wine and went to the Eiffel Tower and went to the Louvre, and then I left. And there's so much left to fill. And then you also get to know yourself in a new context. And you're like, wait a minute, I know myself in the context of getting drunk and eating snails, at this cafe, but I don't know myself in the context of like meeting people who live there or being out all night, or maybe France is the wrong example. Thailand, like I know myself in the context of splashing around on the beach and going on some hikes and eating some pad thai, but I don't know myself in the context of going to remote villages, getting to know people, like really having a more authentic experience. Or I don't myself in the context of like trekking around the mountains in the jungle. And so there is always a sense of like, the more you travel, the more you unravel. Hi, that rhymed. That was unintentional.
I was going to let it slide, but I loved it.
Yeah. I think it becomes hard. I feel like I'm in an identity shift moment, which is helped along substantially by Lexapro, because it has not been easy, where my life is all about collecting experiences, seeing who I am in all of these different contexts, embroidering that tapestry. And now I'm having to take a sharp turn into partnership. My eggs only have so long. So, you have to start paring down and kind of figuring out like who it's necessary to be and what it's necessary to discover about yourself and about the world. And I think that's an interesting process too when it comes to travel. What's essential? What do I still need to see? What do I still need to learn about myself? And I'm still answering those questions, I guess.
Fuck. It's yeah. I registered some piece of that in your just in sort of the build up to you actually saying it explicitly.
Mm-hmm.
And I have wondered if that transformation comes for everyone. I know it of course has biological component for women, right?
Mm-hmm.
A desire for partnership in life,
Mm-hmm.
a desire for stability and security in various ways, and I leaned into that for a long time, but I don't know. I think I'm gonna wake up one day and get hit by the reality that I ran out of time,
Mm-hmm.
and be absolutely floored by it. Like I think I'm gonna be. I still feel. I know academically, of course, I can't do everything, but I internally feel like there's time to do everything. I still feel that I can be an astronaut.
I mean, before I came to Duke, there was a sense that I could have kept going forever. And coming here was very difficult, and especially having a relationship, because I had never had a long-term relationship before. And it was very difficult because I remember when I was little, I had a huge imagination, and some days I would imagine, I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be a coked out ballerina one day. I'd have like all these, like even as like 8 years old, I remember being like, I'm coked up, like anorexic ballerina someday. Even though that, obviously that's terrible and awful, there's just a romance to it. I was able to romanticize everything. And so shutting myself, like cutting those threads, or kind of cauterizing them and choosing just one was really immensely anxiety provoking. And I think at a certain point, I put that actually on my mate choice. Like, I'm going to find like the perfect, most amazing husband ever, who's going to be like super rich. And then therefore, like, we'll be able to keep all these threads open all the time because we'll travel all the time. Nothing will be cut off to us. I guess now, like, there's a complaint in being a woman in that you don't have the choice. I mean, you have the choice. You can choose babies or not babies. But if you choose babies at one point, you don't really have the choice to keep partying. And you don't have the choice to keep all of these. And I shouldn't say partying because that's a bit pejorative. But you don't have the choice to have these threads of opportunity,
right,
open. And that's a real tragedy. But at the same time, it's kind of a blessing because it doesn't allow you to get lost. And it makes you choose, and it makes you become responsible at a certain point. I mean, I think that's sort of like the story of, I mean, I don't want to get too brilliant or anything, but like, that's what death is all about. It keeps us fulfilled. It keeps us purposeful and like moving towards something. And I remember thinking when I was in a horrible, I wasn't in a horrible career. I was in a great career that I hated. But I remember knowing that I was going to have that moment of time has run out, like time has run out, and looking back and being like, how did I fill it? Like, what question? I have all these questions that are still left. And I remember the only way I was going to be happy looking back is if I studied psychology or philosophy, because I would have known that even though I couldn't answer all the questions, I would have lived a life of trying. And so there's something about time running out that really focuses you and makes you choose fulfillment, or at least try. And I don't always know what that means for travel, but I've noticed I've calmed down a little bit about that too. I think that's partially COVID, where there's no opportunity to. And there's a real tyranny in choice and in your life being wide open, because it's like, what do I do next? What's the next path? It's like, it's never enough. Travel leads to unraveling, So it's like, there's so much ribbon that's still unraveled. And how can I possibly like track all of it? And then when time runs out or you're forced to choose, it's like, okay, there's actually less ribbon here, but I'm a little bit more content in what I've already experienced. I'm a little bit more focused on what's next. I hope. That might be the Lexapro speaking.
I think there's a tendency to acknowledge what you're describing in some way or another. I think my particular choice, or not even a conscious choice, just my subconscious behavior, has been to lean into believing that in every day I can get everything done. And so then every day it just kind of blurs into the next, because those 14 things in the morning are only down to 6 now, and it's 2:00 in the morning, but who cares? We're going to keep going. And I've seen that quite a bit. I've seen that in myself at prior points in my life. I've outgrown that and then refallen into it. And I'm curious if that's just sort of like a transformational loop that goes on forever.
So let me understand the problem. So you wake up and you're like, I've got to get everything. I feel like there's infinite time to do everything I need to do.
No, it's specifically that I'm seeing the finity of it. So the finite wall on the end of it is what's forcing every day to be hyper productive.
Yeah. And you are hyper productive?
Day to day, I'm definitely not giving myself the breaks that would like maximize productivity, but leaning into it as best I can.
What's the problem? Does it exhaust you? Are you
exhaustion, but also just seeing myself fall back. Early in my career, I was like this too. So dropped out of school, ended up working in politics, and there's this culture in campaign worlds of, I don't know, like every 20-year-old kid in the world thinks he's the next Karl Rove or whatever. And they drink like 40 Red Bulls a day. And there's just this like, we weren't quite smart enough to be doing this on Wall Street, so we're going to do it in this crappy campaign office in rural Iowa attitude.
Yeah.
And then went to work for the software company. Software company is like early stage startup. There's some of that culture. It's a healthier version of it. Continued working absurdly. And then found myself in what felt like a better pattern, which was having an off button at all.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I saw people coming up, and I was a mentor, and I had folks under me. And for those people who I saw leaning into that too hard, I was actually sort of coaching people out of that mentality.
Yeah.
And then now I'm fucking in it again. It's so bizarre. And so it feels like this infinite loop that, 2 years from now, I will eventually have to sleep. And so I'll figure it out again.
I mean, it probably in similar ways. Like, I remember traveling when I had no money was much more rewarding than traveling even now. And so maybe starting at the bottom of the curve is a better place to be, because you have further to travel up. You don't have a crutch. You don't have anything to rely on much. You're staying in the hostels, or I was big into couch surfing for a while, which was extremely rewarding. And now I think I'm too exhausted to do a lot of that, but maybe I'm too exhausted because I don't have to do it anymore. Like, I don't know the difference all the time. You have the option to stay in a hotel room, like the choice to stay in a hostel, it's not quite so appealing.
I think that's just the moment in life that you're in.
I hope I just don't become that person who's like resort life and that's it.
Cut to 10 years from now, we actually meet in real life at like
Sandals.
like sandals in Jamaica. Podcast didn't work out for Will, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, I discovered myself. I got it now. I'm a resort girl.
On that note, Jacqueline, it has been incredible. Where can folks find you? What are you up to these days that you want people to check in with?
You can find me on Instagram, which is Trumbellina. My name is spelled with a ULL at the end, like the animal, the bull. I'm also on Twitter there. Sometimes I'm private, sometimes I'm public, depending on whether my advisor has yelled at me or not that week about the content and whether it's appropriate for a therapist to have active social media or not. But more importantly, you can find me on my podcast, which is A Little Help for Our Friends, which is a mental health podcast, but it's aimed at the people who have loved ones with mental health issues so that they can understand them better and know how to help them and know how to set boundaries, because that part gets lost, I think, a lot in these conversations. So A Little Help for Our Friends.com, and you can find the episodes also on my Instagram.
Amazing, Jacqueline. Thank you for being here. This was a blast.
It was. Thanks so much for inviting me.
That was Baggage Claim, travel stories no one tells. I'm Will Conway. Thank you so much for being here. If you like it, subscribe, rate, review, all the things. Make sure you send it to a friend, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you hear that at the end of every podcast, but it actually matters, guys. Please do it. If you want to be friends, just text me. Text POD to 332-877-9540. Member to that same number will get you more information on the membership with bonus content and more. Show notes, including weird trivia, credits, and a few essays based on my conversation with Jackie today, exist at the link in the description. Music is by my brother, Kit Conway of the band Stello. See you next time.